A while ago, whilst scrolling through social media, I saw an excerpt from an IndieWire article. John Waters says Gen Z only wants to watch comic book movies in a mall. I don't think this observation about Gen Z is exclusive to John Waters. In fact, this is something I see come up frequently. And I absolutely adore John Waters as both a media personality and a filmmaker, but this comment is irritating. But is it untrue? Those films do tend to make the most money. Have our attention spans shrunken too much for Tarkovsky? Is every film from now on gonna be a remix of the MCU movies we've already seen? Is cinema dying? Well, it's a little more complex than that. Here's my perspective as a filmmaking Gen Z cinephile. First of all, let's talk about comic book movies. Now, there's plenty of tropes and shortcomings typical of comic book films one could point to and call bad, but as far as I'm concerned, that's an oversaturated market. Plus, it's not really what I'm interested in doing. You see, my main gripe with comic book movies is less about the films themselves and more about the context that surrounds their creation. When you sit down to watch a Marvel/Disney film, for example, you're not watching a director's vision, you're watching the vision of a corporate boardroom of executive producers. Hence why more auteur directors typically don't work with them, like Edgar Wright, who nearly directed Ant-Man. Everything you see on screen is a carefully calculated decision that they believe will generate the most box office money, both in North America and international markets, which lends itself to issues I'll have to cover in a future video. It's to the point where nearly every Marvel movie is the exact same. Not terrible, but nothing new or remarkable. After the last Avengers movie, sales have declined, with Disney saying they're now going to try a quality over quantity approach. Which, yeah. Why the fuck weren't you doing that to begin with? Warner Brothers/DC seems to have the exact opposite problem, where they'll have a completed project and decide to trash it instead of releasing it, because they think they can make more money by using it as a tax write-off than through whatever revenue it would generate at the box office. They care more about the financial outcome than creating emotionally moving or culturally impactful films. In the case of Warner Brothers, they care more about money than even releasing a film at all. I may not consider myself a fan of comic book movies currently, but I was in high school, so I understand the appeal. It's fun to watch a mindless spectacle on the big screen, and especially in an era of so much financial hardship, when people go to the theater, they often really want to get their money's worth and not experience something in the same way that they could if they watched it on their TV at home. I don't believe there's anything wrong with enjoying these films, but, well, allow me to tell a story that I can't help but recollect whenever I think about this topic. A little over a year ago, I was visiting with some family friends when the discussion of movies came up, and I asked, what's everyone's favorites? For the most part, it seemed everyone had pretty respectable answers. Good Will Hunting, La La Land, the original Star Wars, The Wizard of Oz. But one person said Avengers: Infinity War. Now, I want to reiterate, I don't think there's anything wrong with enjoying these movies, or that film in particular. Hell, I loved it when it first came out. But for it to be your favorite film of all time, it just seemed puzzling to me. So, in a bewildered tone, I asked him why. In hindsight, I fear my initial reaction was more condescending than I had intended it to be. I didn't mean to come across as rude, but I was fresh out of film school where I'd been surrounded by an echo chamber of my peers with similar interests, although slightly varying tastes. As we progressed through the discussion, it became clear to me that he really hasn't seen that many films. It wasn't that he had bad taste, it was more that he barely understood what his taste was. I think this might be more common than I'd like to admit, but why is that? Movies don't have the same level of cultural currency they once did. This is partially because of streaming services and the internet, but it's also because of out-of-touch studio executives putting too much emphasis on unnecessary sequels, reboots, and remakes. Although there are instances where films fall outside of these categories and have substantial cultural impact, it's often based off of a pre-existing IP or a historical figure that most people are aware of. Although some of the big money-making blockbuster feature films have been questionable as of late, there's still lots of brilliant independent cinema. And as far as media with substantial cultural impact, look at the state of television. As far as I'm concerned, it's as great as it's ever been. Cinema isn't dying, it's just evolving. There's certainly something to be said about the lack of media literacy or the corruption of our attention spans in the modern age, but I really don't believe that discussion is limited to Gen Z. People tend to refer to Gen Z as a catch-all term for young people, but in terms of age groups, that could be anyone from the age of 12 to 27. I think the usefulness of categorizing people based on generations they're born into is often pointless, with the labels being overused. But I suppose Gen Z is unique as a generation, considering the technology we had access to at a young age relative to previous generations, as well as the economic hell and climate disasters we entered adulthood during. But as far as this discussion goes, the only reason why Gen Z would be unique to other generations is because we're currently the youngest aside from Gen Alpha, and therefore didn't grow up in a culture that was as movie-centric as previous generations, with TV shows, video games, and the internet being more culturally relevant to people our age. Even though the internet can act as a distraction from cinema, it can also lead to a degree of accessibility that wasn't available previously. More obscure foreign films, forgotten classics, and independent films are now available within a few clicks of a button, through both streaming services and websites for criminals. There's also virtual social circles for people to share their film opinions, and converse with people who share similar interests, on nearly every social media platform, most prominently with Film Twitter and Film Talk. Also, there's apps like Letterboxd, which have essentially gamified watching and reviewing many films that most of the youth wouldn't have seen otherwise. Although I certainly have my gripes with some of these things, I think they're a net positive, and a big indicator that there's still a large group of people interested in film and filmmaking in the younger generations. As time progresses, I think film could become a more niche interest than what it once was. However, I don't believe there will ever come a time that cinema will die, so to speak. At least not until humanity as a whole dies. Paintings may not be as popular or culturally impactful as they were in the Renaissance era, but there's still painters. My last comment on the matter is that what's good and what's popular has never been an exact one-to-one. And there will always be some slop. Just because McDonald's generates the most money doesn't mean they're gonna suddenly stop making Michelin star restaurants. Martin Scorsese says Marvel movies aren't cinema. Doctors say McDonald's isn't food. Well, pretty much. But having a Big Mac and watching Iron Man every once in a while won't kill you, so long as we remember to eat our vegetables and watch our Kubrick. Although it may not be as important as our food diet, our media diet isn't something we should allow to be dictated solely by algorithms and out-of-touch studio executives. Yes, we should be cautious about what we put in our bodies, but we should also be cautious about what we put in our minds. But as long as we remember to be mindful, I think everything's gonna be okay. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. If you haven't already, watch Pink Flamingos. And take the cinephile pill.